So if people leave, we shouldn't take it personally.
No, nothing personal.
Okay, yes, this is Maren Olsen, whom I just met this morning, but it's a pleasure to meet you, Maren.
Likewise.
She's come from her desk in Los Angeles at the Creative Artists Agency in LA, in Hollywood. And actually, you've started coming here in this part of the world to Europe quite often, I gather. You've been making a number of trips. And I think the best thing to do is to ask you to start off by explaining why. What you do when you're in LA, but why do you make the trips here, and what is it that you're looking for, that you think you can find here, that you can bring here? What's it about?
Yeah, well, so I'll start with the basics. So I am an agent in the media finance department, which is the somewhat relatively retitled film finance and packaging group. And the reason that we evolved to be called media finance has to do with the sort of expansion of the kind of work that we're doing in my department. So originally what my department sort of based the foundation of our work on is the financing and domestic distribution sales of independent films. So our work really grew out of clients having passion projects that they wanted to finance outside of the studio system, and so we began financing those usually once they were packaged internally by ourselves and our colleagues in other departments, and then also we will then take those and go sell them to distributors. Over the years, what we do has expanded really exponentially. Now we work with studios, streamers, as well as independent financiers. We do everything from the basics of single picture financing and sales to company building. We've been involved with a number of companies that we have helped get off the ground by connecting them with investors. And these are all companies and executives that we really, really believe in. And increasingly, our work is taking us abroad. Our department began traveling to China about 10, 11 years ago and building a real business there, which has expanded into a huge operation out of China. And we actually now sell out of our department Chinese distribution rights directly the same way that we do United States distribution rights. And we started partnering with a lot of international companies as well. We partnered with Wild Bunch International, created a co-venture with them. We're working with companies really all over the world. We have a partnership with a company in Brazil. And so what we're starting to do is really engage more with local language production, which means spending a lot more time outside of Los Angeles, working with producers and distributors and filmmakers beyond what the traditional agency has always done and always will do, which is go and scout for talent. So now we're kind of taking that to the next level.
So up till now, up till the start of that story, you had mostly worked with United States filmmakers, producers, to find money for their projects, fundamentally American projects, and with the American market in mind, to get their projects into the American market.
What I would say is that the filmmakers were not necessarily American, but everything else you just said exactly right. We were basically looking at how do we take this project and push it into the American marketplace. And that's still a really fundamental sort of cornerstone of our business, is building projects in the American marketplace. But it's now expanded beyond that, where when we have a client who wants to make something in, let's say that they're, if it's a French filmmaker making a film in France, in French, that doesn't preclude us from getting involved and being a part of selling that film, whether it be to the American marketplace, the Chinese marketplace, helping to get it financed and really push it out all over the world. We're seeing so much more sort of border crossing in terms of what films are able to do, and so we're really leaning into that of looking beyond just the US marketplace to figure out how to best find each and every film the best audience.
You said something also at the beginning there. You said that you're investing, either investing or enabling investment in companies as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is this production companies, distribution companies, sales companies?
Kind of all of them.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah,
you're
it's
providing money or you're finding money, or how does that
for
work?
the most part, we're finding money, but there's also CAA does invest in companies from time to time, and there is that kind of sort of at the upper corporate level of what we're doing. But I think that for the most part, it's really figuring out who's the right investor for the company. So, for example, we had a big hand in raising money for Neon, which is a US-based distribution company. We've helped build several international sales companies, and we're sort of interested in all of the above. Really what we want to do is foster a diverse, healthy marketplace, which means continuing to make sure that companies can survive, especially with the changing distribution landscape and with there being a lot of different things happening and evolving, and especially with the rise of the streamers. In fact, there was just a New York Times article about sort of like, okay, the streamers are here, like now what do we do? And so it's figuring out how do we foster talent, which is really, at the core of being a talent agency. We want to foster talent. We want to make sure that their voices can be heard and that the, talented, artistic individuals around the world can really tell the stories that they want to tell. And in order for them to be able to do that, there needs to be a healthy ecosystem where they're able to exploit that work in whatever way makes the most sense to get to the audience that's really going to properly appreciate it.
So I guess it's, from the CAA perspective, it's not just a matter of providing money or getting into partnerships. When it comes to projects, I mean, you have a vast store of talent that you represent, directors, actors, right through the whole spectrum. When you start to work on a project, I imagine that it's a matter of you perhaps enabling money or bringing money, but also bringing the people you represent, packaging, and bringing them into the project in question.
Yeah, absolutely. When there's something that we really believe can work in the marketplace, we will work with our colleagues in the talent department and sometimes in the lit department if there's a director needed to try to figure out how do we build the best package and how do we build the right package that's going to work in the marketplace with whatever the goals of that project are, what's going to make the most sense for it. So we really try to look at, we'll look at projects all the way from the development stage to things that come to us that are already completely packaged together. And we will figure out how we can best enable that project to succeed. We work with a lot of our own talent, obviously, when they come to us and say, this is the project I want to do, and then we will dive in and figure out how to help them do that. But we also look for projects kind of all over the place, and there doesn't have to be a CAA connection. So if I read a script by a writer, and that's easy because not to get too deep into the WGA aspects, we don't represent a lot of writers right now. So it's easy to read a script by a writer that's not represented as CAA. But let's say that it's one of our, it's a writer and a director, and we don't represent either of them. That doesn't preclude me from going, this is really good. I think this will work, and I think that we can help get it made, and then taking it, into the building, supporting it with our talent colleagues, and helping them to put together a package that'll work for financiers and ultimately get the film off the ground.
But I imagine, since you represent so many people, that projects can come into you, to your department, through, for example, talent, through actors who say, I've read this, I want to do it. Director, maybe. What about projects approaching you from outside, unsolicited? I mean, how easy is it for a producer from perhaps America or not from America to reach you and get you interested in something they want to get set up?
It's a good question, and we get that question a lot. It's a completely unsolicited, blind email doesn't usually go anywhere, and that actually is a company policy issue where we actually we cannot take an unsolicited screenplay.
This is to do with plagiarism, I guess, is it?
Yeah, I actually don't know exactly the specific legal issue, but I know that there's a legal issue, and there's an email address that I have to send it to. But there are still a lot of ways for projects to get to us via other sources. So we do a lot of I just went to the Fast Track, the Film Independent Fast Track, which is a program in LA that different filmmakers apply for, and it's effectively a day where I'm doing roundtable meetings and getting to know up and coming filmmakers and their work. So that's one way in. Inevitably, I I end up getting a lot of projects from those sorts of experiences. And those are, I think, readily available all over the place, and particularly because we are spending so much more time at film festivals globally, there's even more opportunity to reach us, in those types of forums where we're able to have a real conversation, and I can even say to somebody in the room, okay, that sounds like something that we could work with, or maybe it doesn't, but it at least establishes a relationship so that, we try to have our door open as much as possible, but at the same time, we only have so much bandwidth, right? So we do try to filter a little bit of, the sources of our material, but I think that it's really figuring out, is there a film festival, a film market, some sort of way to put your work on a platform that makes it a little bit easier to find its way to someone like myself.
Do you, in a way, need does a project on its way to you or wanting to get your attention need a kind of stepping stone or something to validate it or to authenticate it, to make it something that you can take seriously, that gives it an introduction, gives it a sense of sponsorship of some kind?
That's helpful, definitely. So doing something like through one of the, a film festival lab or something like that, that's helpful because then, it just helps to distill down, these are the projects that myself and my colleagues should really be focusing on because they've been vetted by an organization that we trust. But then there's also just, if I get an email from somebody who I know introducing me to a filmmaker that they believe in as well, that's also meaningful. Sometimes these introductions come from really unlikely places, but it's funny, when I look back on my career and what I did at my previous company, which was an independent company that did a very similar thing to what I do now, but also actually hands-on produced films. When I look at some of the relationships that I developed there and onward, a lot of it was somebody who I knew who didn't have anything to do with the independent film business, emailing me and saying, I know this filmmaker, they've made a movie, I think that you should meet them, and sending me some materials, and it was enough to just whet my appetite and me to go, okay, let's see who this person is and if there's something to do, and that actually turns into things. So, sometimes it's figuring out like who do you know in the 6 degrees of separation to get your project sort of through the door so that it has a little bit of, because typically if I do get an email that's just sort of a blind email, there's what I have to do for company policy reasons, but there's also, it's hard for me personally to read an email and say, oh yeah, I want to make this movie. There's not a whole lot that tends to come through in that format. And so having there be a little bit of a slower, true meeting kind of introduction, the way that you would meet a new friend, tends to be a little bit more productive to figure out, okay, is this something that we can really wrap our heads around and that we feel like we can really do something to help. And the truth is that we are a very creative entrepreneurial department within the agency, and we like to think about new ways of doing things all the time. But sometimes it's not going to be that project. Sometimes we might go, this is something that we don't think what we do here is going to be beneficial for, but let's keep talking, and maybe it'll be the second project or the third project, or some project down the road that will lead to that movie that finally clicks for both of us.
Just describe your setup a little bit. You're a key member of a team.
Yes.
How many? How does it work? How do you work together? Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are about 12 agents in my department, and we do work very much as a team. We're a very collaborative group, and I would say that the way that we work together is extremely fluid. So we kind of have been traditionally bifurcated between the people that are focusing most of their day on financing and the people that are focusing most of their day on sales. And that's just sort of a natural separation because it's sort of two different sets of phone calls.
Sales being placing films with distributors.
Exactly. So the sales team will work on projects that, so I predominantly am on the finance team, but I also have a sales background, and I will typically be involved in the sale of anything that I put the financing together for. So what I will do is myself, and sometimes in conjunction with some of my other finance colleagues, because we do work on a lot of projects together, we'll set up a movie with financing, and then we will probably bring in one of our colleagues that focus full-time on sales once we get to that sales process. So you'll have a team of 2, 3, sometimes 4 people, not as much 4 people, but there will be a group of us that are all working to get the film then properly distributed. Increasingly, we are doing a lot of pre-sales in the domestic space. This goes for really, really big movies as well as some smaller films. And one of the interesting developments is that with the streamers becoming more and more active, a lot of the independent theatrical distributors are starting to move a lot quicker to try to stake a claim on films at an earlier stage so that they don't have to compete with the streamers who might be a little bit, well, they just have a different economic model, right? So the way that they pay for films and the way that they buy a finished film, the economics look a lot different than a traditional theatrical distributor. So we're starting to see smaller films get picked up earlier. So sometimes now, when I'm setting up a film for financing, I'm also setting up the distribution right away, rather than waiting and taking that film finished to a festival or market to get the US distribution set up. So what we tend to do internally is there's a little bit of a push and pull among all of the members of the team of, okay, who's working on what, and what other team members need to support. And as the film flows through its life cycle, we might bring on other people to also be part of that team. The sales team also focuses a lot on third-party sales, meaning films that we may not have had anything to do with financing, but that need someone to be their sales agent. And for those films, the sales team is always scouting those out and trying to figure out what we should come on board.
So you behave like a producer's rep, if you like.
Yes, that's a term I haven't heard in a while.
Used to be known as a producer's rep.
Yes, it's exactly that.
Film,
yeah, we do that.
The typical pattern is that it's what you would call domestic distribution, US distribution,
Yes.
that you're working on. And then on the film, there will be a sales agent. If it's Wild Bunch, you partly own them. In fact,
well, we have a partnership. Exactly.
Okay,
So if Wild, so for example, with Wild Bunch, it's a great example. So when they have their slate of films that they're selling all around the world, we will typically jump in and help them out and do the US part. So we work together and collaboratively that way.
Okay. And within your team, it feels as if the project comes in through somebody, you perhaps, or somebody else, and then a few of you cluster around it.
Yes.
And work on it together, and then eventually deliver it. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Are you the one who's doing all the traveling, or are your colleagues?
No, we all are.
Well?
We all are. We travel a lot, which is part of the reason why we tend to have more than one person on each project, because it means that we have a little bit more flexibility when we are all kind of going to these different film festivals and other meetings around the world. So it gives us a little bit, what we want to be able to do is obviously support the core business of just getting movies made and getting movies seen, with also expanding and exploring new markets and exploring new potential partners. And so we have to, always keep our eye on the ball of making sure that the films that are at the core of this entire concept are continuing to move forward and getting into production on time. And look, we're not successful with all of them. There are a lot of movies out there looking for financing, and I would say that we have a great track record of getting these movies made. But increasingly there are just always more and more films that are looking for this independent finance model, and so it keeps us on our toes for sure.
So CAA is a big agency.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of agents there, and there's a lot of people you represent. Your division,
Mm-hmm.
do you have constant, very regular, occasional meetings with the whole agency? How much are you communicating what you're up to with the talent agents, or people who look after composers, or what?
Yeah.
How does that work in the agency as a whole?
Yeah, there are a lot of, so we have our meetings weekly within our department. We also have meetings weekly with the motion picture group, and so that's when we all come together and really everyone's sharing information. We're able to gather a lot of information about what our colleagues are excited about, and we also share what we're excited about with them. And then in terms of communicating with the entire company, which is really, really huge. I mean, and we have offices all over the world at this point. So, and a lot of different divisions. We've got sports, we've got music, we've got a lot of tentacles of how we work internationally. And so, that'll be more like monthly meetings, or, and a few times a year we will present and, say, hey, this is what we're up to. But it's a pretty communicative place. I would say that, like we are collaborative within my department, we're also really collaborative within the rest of the agency. So if there is an opportunity that we're seeing that we feel is valuable to the rest of our colleagues, we're going to share that. That goes for, you know, project by project or bigger opportunities, and vice versa. If they see something that they think is going to be valuable to the work that we're doing, then they bring it to us. So it's a constant flow of information. One of the fun things that I learned when I joined agency life about 4.5 years ago is just how much information you're able to gather just by being in the building.
So you're traveling, and do you make your decisions as to where you go and which events you take an interest in, or which
yeah,
countries
actually.
you pitch up in? Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it is, you know, who's interested in having me there. You know, like being here, I was fortunate enough to be invited, and I said, this sounds cool, and I'm really happy that I came. It's been great. And then part of it is, yeah, us saying, okay, what's going on? We don't know what's going on in this particular place. Maybe we should go and explore that. And so, you know, it's a little bit of both, and trying to figure out, you know, and there are, I wouldn't say that we have like divided up the world within the department or something like that, but I think that everybody has kind of figured out, okay, what are the things that I could do that push me outside of maybe my comfort zone or my usual pattern of work that, you know, take me somewhere else to just kind of learn and see what's going on and see, is there an opportunity? You know, I definitely have found that getting to the place, there's nothing like it in terms of being able to figure out what's really going on. Because in addition to a meeting that you might have at the Cannes Film Festival, right, where everybody is there and you're having like the 30-minute meetings and everybody's sort of talking about, this is what I'm doing here, this is what I'm doing there. When you actually go to the location where people are from and where people are making their work and where the production is happening, you also learn a lot more about just the place and the culture and what people are thinking about beyond just the nuts and bolts of their next project. And I think that that's something that's really invaluable, and you can't get by just meeting somebody in a sort of traditional, you know, AFM or Cannes marketplace. And so that's where festivals like Tallinn and a lot of the other festivals that I've attended this year have been really helpful, is to just really get into another region and understand like what's making people tick. What is, you know, what are people thinking about? How are people getting their movies made? And then, you know, figuring out, is there something for us to do?
Certainly as a producer, I've always felt that if you're going to make a co-production with another country, it's very important to know how the world looks from that country, how the industry works, you know,
absolutely,
what time they take lunch and dinner, and what the cuisine is like, and so on.
Yes.
But getting under the skin of the industry. And
it's
rather good to hear that you have that approach, that you have that attitude, because it's not always the case with American companies looking to acquire or to make deals. They're not necessarily particularly interested with the people they want to make deals with from the inside. By the sounds as if you are. Your name is well, it's slightly Nordic, slightly Northern European. Does it mean that you've been coming to this part of Europe several times, or?
Well, I've never been to Estonia before. I've spent a little bit of time in Scandinavia, but not till I was an adult. I do have Scandinavian heritage, but generations back. So my family was not so embedded in our Nordic culture that that I spent, time in Norway and Sweden as a kid, which is where my family is from. I've got one side that's Norwegian and one side that's Swedish. But I do love this area. I do love this part of the world, and I am a total wuss. Because I've lived in Los Angeles for so long, so the first day that I'm in a northern country, I am completely freezing, and then I kind of acclimate, and get my I don't know, cold legs, I don't know what to call it, but it takes me a minute, and then I'm very happy.
So you're here now. You mentioned to me this morning when we chatted that you were in Sweden a few months ago?
Yes, yeah, I've actually been in Sweden a couple of times this year. I was at the Gothenburg Film Festival in January, and then I was at the Karl Film Festival in Karlskrona in August, which are two very different ways to experience the country in the dead of winter and then in the middle of summer. But both were really, really interesting, and actually one led to another. I find that the more film festivals I go to, the more film festivals I go to because I meet somebody who says, oh, you should come and see what we're doing in this place or that place. So it's also been very interesting and indicative of kind of how, who's going where also, which I think is really interesting, is how are people deciding which place to go to and how is that benefiting their own personal business wherever they're from.
You obviously always go to Cannes every year. You go to Berlin every year?
Yep.
And what else do you do? You go to Toronto, I imagine, Sundance?
Go to Toronto. So Sundance and Toronto are big sales markets for us. Those are two of the biggest sales platforms in the US. And so we will go there. We've always gone there. We will go there every year. Cannes, we actually tend to do a lot of sales, but we tend to do more international film sales there to the US. So for example, this year we sold Les Miserables to Amazon. That's a French film that's now the contender for the Oscar out of France. We did that deal there, and then at Cannes we also did the deal for Terrence Malick's film End in Life with Fox Searchlight. So it's kind of more of a mixed bag, whereas at Sundance and at Toronto we're probably going to be handling the majority English language films with a handful of exceptions. So where else have I gone? I went to Locarno this year. I went to the Cabo Film Festival in Mexico, to see what was going on down there. It was that was like last week, so I was on the beach. Now I'm here. Definitely gives you a different sense of, I'm always repacking my suitcase.
Was Locarno useful?
Was which one?
Locarno.
Yeah, it was. It was really interesting, and I think a really interesting counterpoint. There's so many film festivals in August and September. I mean, it's like a huge grouping of film festivals that go all the way from the beginning of August till the end of September. I also went to Zurich at the end of September, and I love Locarno, and I think that it's a really interesting kind of, again, you get such a different crowd at every film festival, just sort of depending on where they're located and what their agenda is and the kinds of movies that they tend to be involved with and sort of, for agents where their clients are.
You also tend to go to places where there are talents that you are interested by, although you may not know them yet, or filmmakers whose work you like. Do you tend to get drawn to areas, regions, countries where there's interesting stuff going on, the talent seems to be the kind of talent that you might be able to work with?
I wouldn't say that we're necessarily going, oh wow, there are so many interesting filmmakers out of this country and going there, because honestly I think that we find interesting filmmakers literally all over the globe. But what I would say is that while we're going on these, I guess kind of fact-finding missions and these trips where we're getting to know the people who are working in a particular location, inevitably we're also looking at, at films and looking for talent. The talent scouting never stops, even though what I do is not, the core of my business is not personally being the point agent for a lot of directors. There are a few that I work with, but that's not most of my day-to-day. We're always still looking for that talent, and if there's someone that I find that I'm really excited by, then I'm going to chase after them and bring my colleagues in. So that's always something that we're doing just by nature as an agency.
Coming back to what you were saying earlier about what you try to do when you're looking after a film in the domestic market, and you have a tendency to go early to the traditional theatrical distribution distributors, following the traditional model. But you would, I guess, also be open to representing a project to one of the streaming giants.
Oh, absolutely.
At the same time, would you? Is
Yep.
that something you're also actively doing?
Absolutely. We are looking at the marketplace sort of we're looking at it on a holistic basis all the time. So when we're going out with a film for financing, we're typically going out to independent distributors, independent financiers, streamers, and studios all at the same time. And then figuring out what is going to be the best home for this project. In some cases, we will have interest from all of the above. In other cases, there will only be a specific, maybe it's just the independent financiers or just the streamers that are interested, depending on what the content actually is. But what we're trying to do is keep it sort of an open playing field for everyone and ultimately support the filmmaker in their choice about what's the right home for my project and also what's the economic structure that I want to lean into. It's a really different thing to make a deal with an independent distributor or a studio versus a streamer in terms of what your deal actually looks like and how you get paid. And so that's also something that we want to leave in the hands of the filmmaker. And so the thing that we find to be the best approach is to really go out to everybody at once. Producers, I find, tend to be a little bit more apt to cherry pick and go, well, let's see if the streamers want it, and go to all of the streamers. And then if that doesn't work, go to the independent financiers or the independent distributors. I think that it's always better to have competition, and it's always better to know what all of your options are when you're making the initial decision, so that you can feel, just informed, and like whatever you're doing with your project, which for most people is like their baby, is going to be the thing that's going to, have the right economic return and also get the right kind of audience seeing it. And so, typically we will, we enact a different strategy for each individual project, because depending on what the project is and what it needs financially, that may dictate what makes the most sense in terms of our approach. So that's just kind of speaking in broad terms. There are other projects where maybe we are just going to independent financiers and we're sort of leaving distributors out of the equation. And we're bringing it to distributors like later in the process. There are...
These would be equity, private equity financiers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's also the factor of like, how do international sales fit into all of this? And the other thing that has changed really dramatically with the rise of the streaming platforms is the need to keep the world available so that you can do the big worldwide deal. So one of the other things is strategizing with the international sales company, because especially if you are financing a film with equity, even if the equity investor is saying, no, we don't need pre-sales, because pre-sales, as we all know, have gotten harder and harder, the equity investor is still probably going to want to see an analysis of what the foreign value will be if the film is taken to market once it's finished. And so what we're seeing a lot of is bringing on an international sales agent to basically say, okay, this is what our valuation is, and then holding off and not necessarily selling anything until the conversations with worldwide buyers have been exhausted, at which point then they might go territory by territory. So we're having to adjust the traditional model of foreign pre-sales tax credit equity to get equity to come in bigger in order to make up for not having the pre-sales, and to really be kind of betting on the future of the film and not having quite so much collateral, which is tricky.
You're finding that equity investors are less insistent on indicator pre-sales with a couple of territories or something to kind of prove to themselves that the value is there? They rely on the sales agent, will they?
It really depends investor to investor and what their own experience is. But what I'm finding is that a lot of them are reacting to the worldwide buys that they're seeing go on in the marketplace, and they're deciding, look, if I believe in this movie, I'm going to believe in it all the way through. And as long as there's a sales agent who they trust, and numbers that they trust, then they are willing to step in and cover that gap. But it's not for everybody. Some equity investors don't have that appetite, and they still will insist on pre-sales, and they still will want to follow that more traditional model. So we have to also figure out, okay, if we have a project where we know there's going to be no pre-sales, there may be certain investors that just simply are not worth approaching because they're not going to lean into that. So again, it's kind of project to project, and you also see, for example, there's an investor that I know of who had real success by holding back the sales on a film and was able to then go and do a big worldwide deal much later in the game. I mean, the film had already premiered at a festival, and it was like months later that this worldwide deal, we finally were able to get it going, and it was a huge success. And I think that that investor is going to continue to follow that model because it's worked in the past. And that's also, every investor, as they're trying to protect their fund, wherever that money is coming from, whether it's their money or money that they just represent and that they have a deal to utilize, they're going to want to protect that and make sure. So they're going to do whatever has kind of worked for them in other films.
Something that's very interesting, just following the line that you mentioned earlier, very interesting for producers, filmmakers in countries which don't have English as first language, is that the SVOD companies seem to be able to make a very good business out of local language production, far more than Hollywood, traditional Hollywood is ready to do. You know, we see Netflix particularly making films in many different production centers, in many different languages, and being able to find niche markets for those films all over the world, and that adds up to a decent business. So they're doing it. And it seems to be that what you're saying about the behavior of your division and of CAA, the much more kind of pluralistic or diverse attitude that you have to films and where they come from and what language they're in, that seems to be reflecting the pace in a way that Netflix and one or two companies have set, which is very good news, of course, for all of us. It means that I guess that's something that's really behind your strategy nowadays, because you're looking much more widely for the sources of the films that you can work with and be useful to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's totally right. I mean, the way that our business is evolving is absolutely a reaction to what we're seeing in the marketplace and what we're seeing in terms of consumer behavior. You know, at the end of the day, it's all, you know, the way that we get movies made, it's all reverse engineering. You know, it's looking at how are people seeing movies and then taking that, you know, backwards into, so, okay, what does that mean in terms of how we make movies? And so what we're seeing in terms of, first of all, the audience willingness to watch content that's not in their own language, and simultaneously the rise of local language content, and there's so much more of it being produced. And sometimes those films are really breaking out. And there's no reason why, you know, if it is a universal story, that it can't travel to other countries, and not just in the traditional sort of typical, you know, I think for a long time it was very, you know, kind of going in and out of the US, right? Now it's really just cross-global, where you can see a film, you know, like you've got a film from Lebanon that does really well in China. You know, those kinds of breakouts are proving that audiences just want to see great content, irrespective of where it comes from. So we want to lean into that and figure out, you know, how we can be additive to helping more of that happen. And we're seeing it work for our clients. So it also goes back to the core business of representing talent, of, you know, this is what is benefiting the people who ultimately are at the core of what CAA is all about. So it's all about looking at, all right, so what's happening in these different places, and how can we invest in more of that, and how can we also help to keep a healthy marketplace, you know, where there are a lot of options of how people can get their films made. You know, we have the benefit of being, you know, the first place that the streamers started. And so we sort of know the pattern of how they evolve in a territory. And so as they continue to expand, you know, all of the various streamers, and there are so many of them now, and, you know, we'll see, I'm very curious to see how that's going to evolve over the next year and what consumers are going to react to and what they're not. You know, but we also do have the benefit of being able to then share with you know, people where Netflix is just landing in a particular country and say, okay, so this is what we learned in our experience with working with the streamers. Because I think that what we've really tried to achieve in the US is just a balance where there are a lot of different ways, and the way that we get films financed by going to everybody, you know, that's what I think, that kind of diversity in the marketplace and those options are sort of what keep a healthy just ecosystem of creative content, you know?
You talked about financing essentially from the point of view of financing, which is key to the market in some way or another. Mm-hmm. It's either distributors, or it's a streaming company, or it's equity, which is based on anticipation or expectation, mm-hmm. hope of eventual
optimism,
distribution, sales agents and so on. I'm sure you've spent long enough in Europe and you know plenty enough about the business to know that all films in Europe are made very largely with public money.
Yep, and we're still jealous.
And how does that fit into, I mean, when you're working on a film which has come from Europe, you know, you're going to be more or less obliged to be working with public money in some way in your configuration of the finance. Do you expect the producer to look after that? How much do you know about or take an interest in or help to procure public money for a film? Can you talk maybe about one or two examples of that?
Absolutely. So we tend to not be, so we're very aware of how it works. And I would say that I have a sort of, I don't know, layman's understanding of, you know, the basics of how it might work in a few different countries. We typically look to the producer to educate us on what they are going to be able to access. So, and we do end up working on a lot of films that either are coming out of Europe, or out of the UK, or out of Australia. And for whatever reason, you know, sometimes it's us saying to the producer, well, your director is Australian, are we getting Australian money? Sometimes the producer is coming to us and saying, okay, I've gathered all of these different pieces from all of these different places, and now I have this big of a gap left. So I would say that we are not now, and we probably never will be, the experts that are going out and figuring out how to apply for that money or how it all works and what the rules are. We're definitely looking to producers to be the experts and coming to us. But what we will say to them is, you know, frequently, you know, and again, sometimes it's us encouraging them to do it if it's not, you know, if it's a movie that maybe had its genesis in the US, but has a lot of international components to it, we might say, well, look, you're gonna have more value on screen if you can go and access some of this soft money. So, so there are a number of, I mean, we work on movies like that a lot, and you know, a good example would be like Claire Denis' film High Life. So this is a film that came to us, Claire is a client, it was her first English language film, and it was...
she's a client of CAA as a director.
She's a client of CAA as a director.
So she has a French agent, but she's also got
Yes,
CAA.
exactly. And so, so she's a client, and Wild Bunch was working on it on the international sales side. And that's the other thing is, you know, I tend to find that a lot of the international sales agents that are based in Europe are also incredibly well-versed and super helpful in accessing all of the soft money and the different subsidies and basically putting all of the pieces together. So they had done some pre-sales, they had put together an entire finance plan, you know, with all of the different soft money elements.
The film's in English, right?
The film is in English.
Always was.
Yeah, this was always intended to be in English, and you know, so yeah, so it's an English language film, but it was brought to us as a film that is fundamentally, you know, Claire's style. It is, you know, getting a lot of money out of Europe, and we actually looked at the gap and we took it to an American equity investor, Andrew Lauren Productions, and they put the equity in to complete the financing for the film. And then their upside was our sale to A24 eventually once the film was finished. We took it to Toronto, A24 bought the film, and then that paid back the Andrew Lauren investment. So that's a sort of, you know, taking a, you know, speculative equity investment out of the US and marrying it with a European finance structure. You know, there's another film that we just
Before
did.
you leave that film,
Yeah.
the packaging of that film. What was in place when you took the film to the equity investor? Did you have
Yeah.
Robert Pattinson? Did you have?
Yes, we
Juliette
did.
Binoche?
So the film was really not completely cast. It was Robert, it was Juliette, Mia Goth. I think that those three were firmly attached, and then the entire finance plan was put together, and that's really helpful to us when we can take, you know, one of the things that I'm always saying to people is you know, because American investors are used to seeing a finance plan that is maybe a 20% tax rebate out of whatever state in the US the film's being made in, plus a handful of pre-sales, and then a big equity gap, right? When we can take them something that's a fully baked finance plan that shows not only the location incentive and the pre-sales, but also all of these other pieces, it's
The soft
really
money
appealing.
pieces, you mean?
Yes, all
Yeah.
of the other soft money pieces. It's really appealing to those investors because what they're seeing is that a movie where in the US, if you didn't have those soft money pieces, really the budget's just gonna have to come down. So you get a movie that feels bigger, richer, more expensive, and has a better chance at bigger distribution as a result, that can be very appealing to American investors. And so, we're always trying to utilize that to the advantage of the film, and to the advantage of the investors, because in the same way that we want a healthy distribution ecosystem, we want to have a healthy investment ecosystem. The fact that we have private equity investors that routinely make money in the US on these investments is really what keeps our business running. And so it's important to us that when we're putting investors in a movie that they do make that money back. We don't want to scare them out of the business. No matter how much money or how well funded a company is, or how much money an individual has that they might decide to invest in films, nobody likes losing money, and losing money will make them not want to make any more movies. So we try to, as best we can, in addition, find the balance between getting the film made and also keeping the money healthy, and giving everybody a fair shot at success in that way. So, when Highlight came to us, it really did have a fully baked finance plan with a very specific amount of money needed to complete the budget, and it had 3 key elements of cast. And with some of the investors that we took it to, we did have to educate them on Claire. Some of them knew her really, really well. Others, we had to send her film, so there was a little bit of, it was interesting on that one to kind of get to know which of the American companies were sort of more well-versed in her, and like the company that ended up investing was already a fan, really believed in her, looked at the package, looked at the numbers and how all the numbers fit together, and felt like it was a risk worth taking, and got involved in the film, and it all worked out. It all worked out well.
The lack of necessity to pre-sell can also be very attractive, I think, these days. If you've got soft money and you don't need to make the pre-sales to complete the budget, then for an equity investor which comes in, they can see the whole world is still there to play with, and therefore an offer to Netflix or whoever in due course, that can be
absolutely
an incentive.
Yeah, that definitely is, and I think that's the more, and again, as I was saying before, we're finding more and more equity investors really interested in that worldwide deal, and trying to figure out, how do I lean into that worldwide deal? Because if the film ends up being competed for at a certain level, that number can really drive up, and it can make them feel really good and comfortable about the investment that they're making. So, with all of these investors, it's really about showing them the path. What is that path to recoupment? And sometimes that means traditional foreign sales, and sometimes it doesn't.
If anybody wants to ask questions, I think it's okay with you, Maren, if I jump in.
Let's do it.
By all means. So, yes.
How are you handling this there seems to be a trend, a general distaste for drama, art house dramas, because it's almost now become a widely accepted fact that audience don't want to go see independent art house dramas. Those belong in the series model, on a streamer or on television. Are you seeing that, and how are you handling it? Do you think it's about letting the audience decide what should get made? Is the needle getting tougher to thread? What else?
Well, I would put art house drama in the category of feast or famine, which is frankly the category that I put a lot of aspects of the independent film business in right now. And in my opinion, it's actually been that way for a long time. I think that it's just becoming more starkly recognized, as you point out. In fact, after AFM this year, it was one of the big themes that I heard from the international sales agents of dramas are just even harder than they ever were. But I say feast or famine because, on the other hand, it's typically the dramas that go to the Oscars. So you have, but the problem is there's not a lot of middle ground. You either have a wildly successful drama, or you have dramas that don't quite go the distance, that feel like their audience is really, really small. I think that really what that means is that it's figuring out how to, for producers, I don't think that drama is dead by any means. I mean, again, I think that some of the most successful independent films are dramas. And at my previous company, when I was actually producing, our most successful films were dramas. So I think that it's just having to think a little bit more creatively about how you're getting those films made, because you're probably not going to be doing the independent film sales model. You're probably going to have to put it together in a different way in order to get it made. And so that's where thinking creatively about how to use the soft money and other incentives, how to use grants, potentially how to use private equity to get those financed, because I think that it's safe to say that yeah, with a few exceptions, they're probably not, you probably are not going to get the pre-sales that you would have gotten a year ago or 2 years ago on an independent drama. But on the other hand, we still see them succeed. So I guess as you say, that the needle is getting a little bit harder to thread, but it's still possible. I think it's just rethinking the financial model.
Yes.
For worldwide deals, what, is that typically a streamer or the bigger studio like Fox, or?
Could be both.
Or, I guess it's not going to be more like a local distributor, obviously. Or, like an A24 is obviously not going to.
Most of the time A24 isn't, but I think that they actually just bought a film for the world recently.
Really?
It's starting to become, look, it's, not every distributor can do a worldwide deal, but a lot of them actually can, or they can do the US plus a handful of other territories. Yeah. So when we're in the process of selling a film, we're typically having pretty involved conversations about what territories are valuable to the distributor and how to then kind of parse that out. There's also the balance of, we sometimes have films that have been pre-sold, and then a worldwide buyer comes in and wants to buy them. Now, if it's a streamer and the film has been pre-sold to theatrical, what we tend to see is if we do that streaming deal for the US plus whatever territories are available, all of the pre-sold territories are very likely to want to renegotiate or get out of their deal, and then the streamer will go and pick that territory up. So that's something that's happening more on the international sales side of the business, but there's a real push and pull, and what we're kind of trying to encourage everybody to do is just remember there's always a deal to be made. If you have made a movie that is really going to appeal that broadly, that you have competition for all of these various territories and a worldwide situation, even if you've pre-sold, there's usually a deal to be struck to make it work for everybody, because a theatrical distributor isn't going to want, if Netflix has the film in the US, the theatrical distributor in any other country in the world is going to be like, I'm not going to, why, they're not going to sell, they're not going to do it theatrically. It's kind of turning into everyone needing to kind of move in the same direction in terms of how the film is being released. And so, there's kind of that late in the game sort of revisiting of the deal structures that tends to happen.
You mentioned a film this morning, which we didn't explore very much then, but
yeah.
I'd like you to maybe tell the story of it, which is the Olivier Assayas film.
Oh yes,
film,
yeah.
Wasp Network.
Yeah.
Which I think is in Spanish, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is.
Certainly.
Yeah.
But
There's the English bit, so it's set in Miami, Cuba. That's like.
It's.
Yeah, but it actually has a lot of Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's Garcia Bernal,
yeah, of course, the cast is
Cruz, yeah. So. You were involved in that film. Were you helping to?
I personally wasn't. My team was,
okay.
And so that film premiered at Venice, and then went on to. Actually, did it play Toronto? Now I can't remember. But that's a film that is actually not an American film. It was not made in the U.S. It was shot in the U.S., but it wasn't. It's not technically an American film. Ultimately, picked up as a foreign language film, and I think that's something that we're going to start seeing more and more is, films coming from outside of the U.S. and being bought for the U.S., to be exploited. Yeah. So, and I think that's, we're seeing a lot of that where, in the same way that Les Miserables was bought by Amazon, specifically for the U.S. territory. There are those big worldwide deals, and I think that's how everybody is thinking of the streamers. And I think the streamers are still very open and excited about doing worldwide deals, but there are these other examples of films that have been sold already, where they then go into the US and they're sort of picked up as these.
And that's what happened with
Lost,
Network.
exactly.
It was bought for the US by?
Netflix,
I see.
yeah.
For the whole of North America or just the US? Or?
That I don't know,
Okay.
actually, off the top of my head,
But
but
most of the world had been sold already, had it?
I believe so, yeah.
Yes. As I asked, probably, yes, certainly
Mhm.
pre-sold, I would think. Who was the sales agent on that? Do you remember? Doesn't matter. It would have been, I mean, it would have been probably one of the big French companies.
Yeah, I because this wasn't my movie, I wasn't as hands-on with
Okay.
this one. So sorry that I don't remember that off the top of my head. But I think that, you know, again, it's sort of, you know, leaning into like this was a film that was done in more of a local language way,
Yeah.
that we're really leaning into, because that's really, it's like, you know, I think that people are also, in addition to just local language production being so big, I think people want to see authentic content and content in the language that makes sense for it to be in.
Yeah.
And so I think that we're going to only be seeing more of that. Like I wonder, you know, when I was watching Chernobyl, just to like switch to miniseries, where you've got, you know, basically a British show, but entirely set in, you know, you kind of wonder like, how much longer are those kinds of location-specific shows going to be shot in English?
Well, you know, in this part of the world, they've shown that subtitles can work on television,
Mm-hmm.
even for English-speaking audiences.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Scandi crime stuff. Chernobyl's an interesting example because I react very badly to the idea of, you know, films not being made in the authentic language. I have to say that when I watch it, I mean, it's absolutely compelling stuff.
Oh, totally. I loved
It's
it.
been very, very beautifully handled, and the way the English language is handled is very, very well done. It's very clever to English ears. It works
Yeah.
remarkably well. You know, the characters sound like they should sound in terms of their class and where they come from and so on. So it's a very interesting example. But you're saying that you think that even something of that kind of quality may not last in English. It may be that
I just
the
wonder.
demand will be there.
Yeah, because when you look at what people are watching, it doesn't. You know, as you said, subtitles do not seem to be as much of a barrier. So it's, you know, it's something that I'm not so much certain. I don't know what's going to happen. I just wonder, is that going to change, where it's going to become even more, and especially with TV. Is it going to become the norm that if you're shooting in a specific location, that the local language is going to be that language, no matter who's producing it, who's in it, what's, you know, what's the subject matter. So, I mean, we'll see. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, Netflix have shown that an intimate family story in black and white, in Spanish and Mixteco languages, you know, Roma, can be an absolutely massive movie.
Definitely.
Okay, it helps that you have Alfonso Cuarón behind the film. But on that subject, I mean, you've mentioned now a film by Claire Denis, a film by Olivier Assayas. These are two, okay, they work in a non-English language most of the time, but they have a worldwide audience, these directors.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have a real reputation and a momentum for their work. And I wonder how low can you go? How small can you go? How new director, not yet established market director can you work with? From your point of view, from how small a film can excite you?
Well, we work with a lot of first-time filmmakers. I would say that most of the first-time filmmakers that we are working with are based in the U.S. But what matters to us, whenever we're assessing a project and should we get involved and should we help build this or not, we are always thinking about, you know, how, like, what are the materials that we can show that prove that this is a good investment? And so, you know, if it's, so we work a lot with filmmakers who have short films, you know, and if the short film is good enough and the script that goes along with it is good enough, then, you know, that's something that we can work with. You know, when you get up to, and it really also corresponds with budget, I think that a lot of investors are willing to bet on first-time filmmakers at a certain budget level, at like a, they're gonna give them less than $5 million to make that first feature, no matter how amazing their short is, with a couple of exceptions. There are always exceptions to the rule. But no, we're very open to working with super inexperienced filmmakers, provided that they have some kind of work sample that we get excited about, and all the way, end up. So the kind of fun thing is that budget we don't have a lot of budget restrictions. If it's the right project, this year we set up a $150 million movie independently. We also have set up films under $1 million. So it's really a wide range, and what matters is, what are the tools that we have to build the movie, and how does that all, how does that make sense to an outside investor? When you're going up to that huge number, you absolutely are working within a traditional pre-sale model, right? You're not doing that with just some speculation and like, okay, we think that we're gonna be able to make this money back. Whereas if you're making a sub $10 million movie, you may have investors going, all right, let's just take a flyer on it. Let's just make the movie and then we'll sell it for the world once it's finished and see what happens. So there are a lot of, it's not apples to apples with everything, but we have a range of different kinds of films and filmmakers that we're working.
Relationships with producers?
Oh,
Talk
yeah.
a lot about talent, but do you also nurture relationships with producers?
For sure.
Yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah, because, a director's gonna make a movie, once a year at most. Producers are much more prolific, and they all have their certain kind of taste and style. So we definitely rely on producers to be helping source that great material and bringing it to us. And, really, we're more than anything, I would say, a resource for producers, because a lot of them will come to us and bring us on as a partner to help them deal with all of the financial aspects of their film so that they can go and focus on the creative. And we really like working with producers who are collaborative in that way. Like I said before, oftentimes we're relying on them for a certain kind of information. We've had producers come to us in the past and they're sort of just like, okay, here's my stuff, can you go find me some money? And it's like, that's not really what we really want is the producer where I say, okay, can you go get me, this soft money and that soft money, I'm gonna work on this other, like, we wanna be collaborative and be able to say, this is gonna, let's come together and figure out the best structure for this particular film, and then, each kind of divvy responsibilities, and then, go forward and put them into action and get the movie into production.
You also mentioned to me, and I'd like you to say it again really, that, okay, that's working with producers, but that you've noticed that Netflix or the streaming companies are inclined to go straight for the talent and the director and the writer and so on.
Yeah.
And that you, given that you're also an agency, that you're rather happy to be able to help them to negotiate a better deal.
Oh, always, we're agents.
The talent, rather than
No, I mean, we're always...
improve the deals that these streaming companies are imposing on the talent.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's really important that that everybody, that everyone's getting the best deals possible, and particularly with any of the streamers, because there is no back end. So that whole deal is up front, and in the same way that when we're doing a deal with a distributor in the U.S. that is a traditional theatrical distributor, we're looking at, okay, what's the back end? What's the long tail on this? What's the upside? And there's sort of that balancing act. We actually, I mean, by way of example, and this isn't necessarily like on the finance side, but more on the distribution side, when we're analyzing a deal from a streamer, let's say that there's a film that's finished and we've got offers to pick it up for distribution from a traditional theatrical distributor and from a streamer. We're gonna run the models of like, with the streamer, you know what the number is. You know exactly how much you're making, and that's where it ends. With the traditional, we will then run the model of what's the upside if this movie works. And that also, then we can hand that over to the producers and the creatives and say, okay, so, in model A, this is where you're starting, but this is your potential. In model B, this is what you're getting, and it's maybe a great number, but it's also all you're getting, and then they can kind of decide. And sometimes looking at those two models side by side, it'll be really black and white, what makes the most sense financially, and other times it won't. But at least we definitely will enact the tools to help everybody make the best deal possible. I mean, I think the thing that everybody has to keep in mind right now is that content is the most valuable part of all of these equations. And with all of these streamers coming into the business, and then with all of the traditional outlets that we've had and will continue to have, hopefully, they all just need great content. And so I think it's really important that content creators remember that at the end of the day, you guys are really in the driver's seat to be providing this. These companies are not going to be, they're going to be creating, I'm sure, plenty of their own content too, but without being fed all of that, they're really relying on artists to bring them the material to make and put on their platforms. And so I think it's a great opportunity for producers and filmmakers to really be as prolific as they want to be. And where we're sitting as agents is we want to make sure that everybody is being as prolific as they want to be and that they're getting paid really well to do it.
It's also
sort of the nature of who we are.
Sometimes it's also a matter of considering what's best for the development of the talent.
Yes, absolutely.
What you're saying, which I think as an agent you would probably see the sense of, or would strongly agree with maybe. I'm thinking of a particular film, a Finnish film, 2 or 3 years back, which was one of the big art movies of the year. Mm-hmm. Everyone in this room will know the film I'm thinking about, which is The Happiest Day in the Life of Olli Mäki. And there, the producer selected the sales agent for that film on the basis of it being a company that was prepared to get on board for doing the best to develop the career of the director. If the film became successful, the sales would be handled in a way that would give the film the best kind of visibility for his future career. In other words, they were going to refuse a Netflix deal if they were offered one.
Oh, interesting.
Because they wanted to play it everywhere with as much exposure and visibility and written stuff about the director as possible. And this is exactly what happened, actually. Les Films de Los Angeles, which is the sales agency, they said they bought into this. They sold quite a few territories out of Cannes. The film won the big prize. It won the Sutter Regard Prize in Cannes. And they sold 20 territories or something. And then Netflix came knocking and offered to buy out the rest of the world. And they said no. They refused to do it. And it wasn't a terribly impressive number, I must say. But they kept the film in the theatrical model and made more sales in order that Juho, of course my name, the director, should get the longest and most visible and best build-up and best investment in his career for the future. So.
And because I don't know the story of how this ended up, did it feel
well.
successful
yes,
in approaching it that way?
It's of course it's an art movie. It's not a big film. It's a really lovely film. It has a terrifically satisfied audience, but it's not a huge audience. And the film has done several $100,000 of sales. It cost just over $1 million to make. It had money soft money from the Finnish Film Foundation, which doesn't have to be paid back, and that's like 70-75% of the budget. So I mean, in terms of is it a good deal in the way of that kind of European film? Yes, it's a very happy deal. And the sales agent made enough money out of it to be happy, and the producers have seen real money out of it.
That's great.
Which is good. And Juho is probably more widely known and more widely appreciated by that kind of distribution than if it had simply gone straight to a platform and just disappeared, really. So that's the curious thing about that kind of distribution.
What's the name?
Yes.
I missed the name.
Of who?
The project.
Oh, the project. The Happiest Day in the Life of Olli Mäki. I'm sure you've heard of it. It doesn't have that title in Finnish, by the way. In Finnish, it's whatever the smiling man.
Yes.
Thank you.
That makes some sense.
Well, yeah, I think that's always the question,
Yeah.
right? And that's really what we're aiming to do in general, is just help filmmakers have that choice about where they want to, and for some filmmakers, that's going to be their priority, is being in theaters. And for other filmmakers, we've actually had them come to us and be like, I want to be on a streaming platform. That's where more people are going to see my movie. And so it's really, and I think we're kind of in a wonderful time that way, where that is an option. And so in a perfect world, to continue to foster sort of both sides of the coin, then filmmakers will be able to have that choice of, you know, where do I want my film to live? Do I want it to be on a streaming platform, or do I want it to be having that theatrical life, and sort of what that means to people. We saw it a lot in finished film sales. That's where the question first came up, obviously, is when you've got a theatrical distributor and a streamer going after it and trying to make that choice. But I think that it's becoming more and more a decision that people are making earlier, as you pointed out, with this particular film, where everyone said, this is going to be theatrical and we're going to make sure it happens that way.
Interesting. Just as a matter of interest, who in the room are producers, who are directors? Who are producers? A few, not that many. How many directors do we have put in the room? Oh, you're both, are you? Okay.
Both.
You're a director. Okay.
By necessity.
By necessity.
But we like that, you know.
So which country are you from?
Croatia.
Uh-huh. And you're saying that you're having to produce your own stuff because...
I directed 4 feature films. I produced 2 of those.
Because you couldn't find a producer, or you didn't want the producer? You didn't want to work with the producer?
No, actually I'm working right now with 4 or 5 different producers. You know, I was kind of forced to produce, and what also I like to do, I like to package the project myself, and then I just hand it over to somebody else. You know,
What a dream.
want to do the hard work and then let the others go. And but of course, I'm always involved one way or another with different kind of projects. You know.
Any other questions for Maren? We're going to stop in a little while. We've got a bit longer, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're fine. Yes.
I had a question. We've been speaking a lot about feature films or like independent feature films, but also kind of the conversation that inevitably gravitates towards the streamers. And I was kind of I was curious, just from your perspective, what you kind of see the appetite being for like the streamers, for newer directors working in kind of either mini-series format or more like serial type of formats. If you've seen that they have kind of like a growing appetite for that type of content as well, or if it's perhaps like a better route for the content creators to follow the more traditional route of focusing on making like a first film. Just what your kind of pulse on the market is in regards to that.
Well, I personally really only work with feature films, so I can't speak to it too specifically, but what I would say is that the appetite, I think, by all of the streamers right now for series and miniseries is massive. I think that in the same way that when we're looking at a first-time filmmaker in the feature world, we're looking at what are their work samples and how do we know that this person is going to deliver. What I would imagine is it's a similar process on that kind of TV serialized side of things, but because I don't deal with it personally, I couldn't say kind of, you know, what, I couldn't say like what I think the real appetite is for up-and-coming filmmakers. I mean, the truth is that everybody is trying to work in TV right now, so I imagine it's probably pretty competitive because you have veteran filmmakers that are also excited about those formats. You know, I think that for, you know, if you're just getting started in your career as a filmmaker, I think that it's probably, you know, all about what your vision is, and do you want to be making, if you want to be making a miniseries, if you want to be making TV, that's where you should lean. If you want to be making features, then that's probably what you should do. You know, there are a million different paths in this business to getting where you want to be, but I am not a big believer in like catering your vision to what you think the marketplace is going to be, because I think that especially at the beginning of an artist's career, that sort of inspiration of how they want to express themselves is really important. And so, you know, that being said, it's also important to make something that people are going to want to watch. So if you're going, you know, you want to be following your heart and following your vision as a creator, but also balancing that with where is this going to live eventually. If you're going down the film road, you do have to be thinking about where does this movie live, who sees it, how do they see it, what's the what are the economics of that. But I don't know that I would say it's a good idea to cater the type of project that you want to make based on, is it going to be easier for me to get a job here or there? But that's just my own personal feeling, really not based on anything that I've learned in the marketplace. That's just my 2 cents.
I think something that's facing European filmmakers or film professionals, particularly producers, is that television is a real business
Yeah.
that works. Film is not a business, really.
But we
It's a kind
try
of-
to make it one.
You do it, you make it a better business in the US. It is more of a business in the US. Here it's a kind of strange cottage industry that has a certain potential for the jackpot occasional, but it doesn't really work. I mean, producers in Europe, most producers now reckon they have to have a TV side to what they do in order to sustain it.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at 1 or 2 people in the room who I know are doing exactly that. And this is even, you know, in English language country like the UK, for example. But can I ask you, because just exploring this idea of equity, private equity, which has been a feature of the indie American filmmaking landscape for a long time now, and is very much established as a way to work, and you have investors there. Typically in Europe, this is much rarer. It's fairly common in the UK, often sprung on the tax credit, which has to be cash flowed by a company, and that company then does something else with some sort of tax angle. But have you worked with any of the companies in the UK, for example, or the 1 or 2 other companies that are starting to sprout in the rest of Europe?
Yeah, absolutely. We've definitely worked with UK equity companies. We've worked with equity-based internationally in a lot of different places. I mean, as it comes to equity, we are kind of open to working with anybody that wants to play in that space. We take equity, you know, out of a lot of different places. What we try to figure out is, okay, so somebody contacts us from, you know, like name a country, and says, you know, we have built a film fund and we want to invest in movies. It really becomes a question of, okay, what are your parameters? What are your goals? What are the kinds of films? Sometimes these funds are extremely specific. Sometimes they're very broad. Sometimes they are individuals who have made their own money and they're spending their own money, and sometimes they're individuals that have raised a fund from a number of different people. Sometimes it's a company that is, you know, creating kind of an offshoot of their existing business, and they've, you know, kind of created a film department, and they're using their company revenue to establish this other side of it. So what's important to us is figuring out, what does this company need to get out of this in terms of content, type of project, how much they want to be investing per project, and then we try to best match make them with those projects that are out there. You know, it's a diverse array of different people that we're working with, but I think that, I mean, what we're finding is that the idea of investing in film, as much as, you know, especially here in Europe, people aren't really thinking a lot about private equity because there is so much soft money available. You know, but I guess my question is, why not? Because it only opens up more avenues of how you can get your movie made. And, you know, what if you don't get awarded that soft money? What if your application is declined? And I don't know that that happens a lot, but, you know, the way that we look at it is we're always trying to figure out new, different, more ways of getting films funded, because that's what we've had to do. And so, I mean, we'll kind of see how things continue to evolve, but we're finding that the interest in investing in film is pretty global.
Actually, I think European producers more and more, and from the point of view of the producers that we have in our network at ACE, for example, the challenge now is getting the money from the market, or getting, you know, money that means anything from the market. The soft money is usually not difficult for a project of any merit at all. For one thing, a lot of it's more or less automatic. You know, it's pretty much always possible for a European producer to fill a certain amount of the finance plan with soft money. The question is, how much can you get from the market? And now everybody's working completely the other way around from the way it was 20 years ago. You know, we used to go out and find the pre-sales, get the money from the sales agent, and then fill the gap with the soft money. Everyone works the other way around now. They go out and get as massive amount of soft money as they can, and then they get what they can from the market, but it's so small that often there's a gap. And they're looking for equity. If they're looking for equity, it tends to be in place of the market money.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself is quite good, because from the reason you were saying, for the argument you were mentioning before, that if you can have a strong sales agent with some interesting estimates and interesting endorsement of the market potential,
Mm-hmm.
then you can get more money from an equity investor than the market will give you from its
Yeah.
own resources.
Mhm.
That's how it tends to be now.
Yeah.
Which, would mean that from your point of view, if you were to be brought even a rather high-profile European film, there would probably be a lot of soft money in it.
Mm-hmm.
But where you could really help is to help the producer to find money that either is good market money, but if not, then good equity.
Yep.
Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely, and I think that is something that we can be helpful with, is, figuring out, what are those films where, perhaps some of our equity resources are going to be interested in being a part of them. And, traditionally, obviously, most of the people that we work with are investing in American movies that are in English language, but that doesn't mean that isn't going to evolve. I think that for the kinds of people that are making these investments, what matters to them is that they're recouping and they're making money. So it's really just about asking the question, what's the financial model? How is this going to be recouped? And then figuring out who's the equity person that is going to be interested in this particular story and this particular filmmaker is going to be excited by the idea of being a part of this project. And really a lot of what we do, it's kind of matchmaking. It's figuring out who's going to mutually benefit from being a part of this and putting project and investor together in that way.
Yes.
Now, what I observed on the markets in the last 6 to 7 years is that you have a huge amount of feature films produced worldwide. Let's say in Germany, an average 250. In the Bollywood market, let's say also 250.
Many more.
And so the complaints you get in Germany and the top business is we are flooded with huge amounts of films. And the spectators are going to very few Hollywood films and very few German blockbusters, and this is not fitting together anymore. I have the impression. So my thing is always, as a producer, how do I argue towards a potential investor or potential distributor and sales company when I come with a first or second time filmmaker and saying, here, I'm one in the flood. But I can promise you that somehow you get your money back. When it's private equity, funding institutions in Germany want money back, so everybody wants to have the money back. So you're kind of in between. How do you argue? How do you handle this situation?
It depends on the project, but what we really look at is, what are the comps? What are the other movies that are like this movie? Whether they be looking at who's in the film and saying, the box office of this particular actor. If you're talking about a first or second time director, you're probably not giving a whole lot of track record off of that director, but hopefully that first or second film that they've done, or their short film, you have some kind of cachet, right? Where you're able to argue for the creative merit of it. But I think you really have to look at, one of the things that we do, and actually, this comes into play a lot more when we're pre-selling a film. So for example, there have been a couple of instances this year where we have had a distribution deal that we actually set up early during the financing process in the US. I'll give one example of a film where the deal was it was an OMG deal, but it was a gross corridor. So we basically were modeling out for the investors, all right, so this is what your model looks like in terms of the recoupment of how you're going to recoup it. And then we were taking that model to the equity investors and saying, look, so your investment is against this deal. So if the film does this much box office, then you're recouping your investment. And then looking at the track record of the distributor and what they tend to do, what their films tend to do in terms of their box office performance, and then also comps of other films of just the type, style, story, director, cast, and showing, basically why, from a reasonable analysis, it feels like a good bet. Everybody knows sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think that being able to really point to specific examples, that makes sense. I mean, the comps thing, I've seen those in film presentations forever. And most of the time, they're terrible comps. Most of the time, they are 10 years old, or the budget of the movie was wildly different than the movie being proposed, or the experience level of the director is wildly different than what's being proposed. I think that what's really important is to use incredibly realistic comps, not the comps that are the sort of, lightning in a bottle successes. Those aren't, and I don't think there are any investors anywhere that are interested in those kinds of, betting on the lightning in a bottle model anymore. I think there was a moment in time when, everybody was looking at these movies that broke out of Sundance and had massive, massive success and going, oh, I want to do that. But then people started to realize that those are so few and far between that it's not a business. So, so I think that, look, even in a flooded market, there are going to be those films that rise to the top and actually are successful. And it's really a matter of you doing your own analysis as a producer that feels like it's legitimately convincing and being able to then take it to an investor and legitimately convince them to do it. I think that the argument of just believing in it and believing in the filmmaker is, sure, it's a piece of the puzzle, but that's not why an investor puts money into anything. You really have to show them that there is a reason for them to believe that it will be successful, that's a concrete, sort of something you can write down on paper and analyze.
I think time is up. We're being told.
All right.
Listen, thank you so much.
Thank you.